Hello students, this is module 5.6.7, phylum Arthropoda. This includes the spiders, ticks, and mites, the insects, and the crustaceans. This is by far the most diverse phylum of life on the planet. This opening slide with the photos gives you some idea of that, but let's go on and talk about. So spiders, ticks, mites, insects, crustaceans, centipedes, scorpions, wind scorpions, so many things that weren't mentioned are also in here, but the features that unite them all is the body plan. They are segmented animals, but the segments here are all different. Unlike the annelids, the earthworms and their relatives, which were also segmented, but all the segments were similar there, here the segments are different. And this group also, the arthropods, the feature for which the phylum is named are their jointed appendages. Arthro means joint, and poda means legs, so jointed legs, jointed appendages. Another very notable feature is the fact that they have an exoskeleton that's like a suit of armor. It's made out of chitin. Remember that tough carbohydrate. These animals, like many of the previous groups, have three tissue layers: endoderm, ectoderm, mesoderm. They have a true body cavity. They have a complete digestive tract. They have an open circulatory system in which their blood flows in a large chamber, often called a hemocoel, but you probably don't need to remember that. They exhibit quite advanced cephalization. So all these features are typical of the arthropods, but especially those jointed appendages, that exoskeleton, and that segmentation. And so the skeleton is an exoskeleton of chitin, and it must be shed to allow growth. And just imagine if when you were 3 years old, you're put in a perfectly fitting suit of armor. Well, as you grow, you're going to be in trouble. But with the arthropods have the ability with enzymes to separate the exoskeleton from their body and to split it and then crawl out of their old exoskeleton. And then they form a new one. When they form a new one, they inflate their body so it's bigger than it is, and then they secrete it, and then they have the body shrink down, and that gives them room to grow inside. These animals feed. The ancestral condition is to have mandibles. Mandibles are jaws with teeth. And these mouth parts are widely modified. Many insects no longer have mandibles, but that was the ancestral condition. And we'll see that mouth parts are an important feature in separating the large groups of arthropods, the different groups within this phylum. These animals have bilateral symmetry. Reproduction is primarily sexual. The development frequently involves the larval stage, and this will allow dispersal or even reduction in niche overlap with the adult. And that is that the young and the adult will eat in different places. In some insects, this goes so far as the adult is air-breathing and the immature form may be aquatic, so really separating the niches. So we're going to look at, we cannot do justice to this group in the time we have, so we're going to just give you a very, very brief introduction. And we're going to consider three groups. The spiders, ticks, and mites are one group. The insects are a second group, and the crustaceans are a third. So first, let's look at the spiders, ticks, and mites. Now, the features of this group, and we're not going to use official group names as such, but some of the features include the distinct type of mouth parts that this group has. Here, we're simply calling them fangs. They have a technical name, but this is going to do here. They're hollow, piercing mouth parts. These animals lack antennae. So if you look at a spider, a tick, or a mite, they don't have any antennae. They will all have 8 walking legs, and spiders have the ability to spin silk or to spin a web, and spiders are also very venomous, depending on the species. You should be able to draw a spider there are two main body parts, and here I'm just going to do a little drawing right here, and mine is facing downward. So the first body part is called the cephalothorax, and it's spelled right there for you. I probably shouldn't have done that, but I did. And here's their walking legs, of which they have 8 or 4 pair. Excuse me. Their fangs are called chelicera. Here, we're not going to call them chelicera. We're going to call them fangs. And the body regions, as I said, the first body region is the cephalothorax. That you should know. And the second body region is called the abdomen. On the tip of the abdomen, there are what we call spinnerets. And these create silk or web. I guess that's most of the features that we need, and you should be able to draw a spider like that. The thing about these animals is they can be very diverse. And in America, we have 2 dangerously venomous spiders. The black widow has, of course, a distinctive hourglass underneath its abdomen, a red hourglass on a black, shiny abdomen. Young black widows have the same shape, but they tend to be brown and tan and orange, as opposed to multicolored. So if you see those, and the very strong web that makes a crackling sound when you tear through it. The web of black widow has higher tensile strength than steel of the same diameter. In the past, they have used black widow web to make crosshairs in gun sights, scopes and such. The second dangerously venomous spider is the brown recluse. It's called the fiddleback. On the top of its cephalothorax, it has a shape that looks like a violin, hence its name, fiddleback. These 2 spiders live in, their niche can overlap a little bit, but you can see black widows living out under rocks along washes and places like that. The brown recluse likes to live in human buildings, like in sheds and garages and attics, and they like to get in among papers and things like that. And so if we consider some of these animals, we'll consider spider bites on the next slide, but I want to talk about some of these other animals here. Here's another spider right here. This is a yellow crab spider, and it's a lie-in-wait predator. It doesn't make a web. It gets in a yellow flower and waits till a pollinator comes and it grabs it and bites it. Its venom will kill and then start to digest the body, and they will use their hollow fangs to suck the juices out. Here we see a wood tick. These are blood-sucking animals, and they occur, I've seen them right around here in the Huachucas and other places, and they will wait on the tops of grass and other vegetation, and they'll grasp onto a mammal that comes by, and then they'll suck blood from them. These are seen during the monsoon. This is a red velvet mite, and this mite is a predaceous mite. It feeds on small arthropods. They can be fairly sizable. I don't want to say too big, but maybe half the size of a pencil eraser or something like that. And they are fuzzy and red, and you can see them out on monsoonal times running around. It's quite interesting. This is a scanning electron micrograph of a dust mite, and dust mites are very abundant, and they have co-evolved and live with humans now. They live in our habitations. They primarily eat our shed skin. We shed many millions of cells every day, and they are there to eat them up. And they, of course, take up residence on the floor and in our bedding, in our pillows, and other places. Some people that have allergies are allergic to their shed exoskeletons. Sorry about my itchy finger, but we're going to move on and talk about spider bites. Those are the 2 dangerously venomous spiders, the black widow in the upper left, the brown recluse in the upper right. And this is actually, the map is showing the range of the recluses. So the brown recluse is really over here in the central southern part of the United States. Over into Arizona, we have the Arizona recluse, a different species, but it nevertheless has the same venomous effect. If you're bitten by a black widow, you can expect severe cramps in the large muscles, the back, shoulders, abdomen, and thighs. And those that are at risk for dangerous effects of black widows include the elderly and those with high blood pressure, and also young children. An adult that's bitten by a black widow who's healthy should be fine usually. The brown recluse starts with a target-like bite, and the pictures on the bottom show 2 brown recluse bites, and then it ulcerates. I had trouble saying that, didn't I? And this creates something called necrosis, which is the death of tissue, and it can get worse and worse from that initial venom injection. And they actually call this necrotic arachnidism. Of course, arachnids is a scientific name for spiders, and necrotic is in reference to the necrosis. And it may require surgical treatment, and what can make everything much worse is if it gets infected with bacteria. But they have some really nasty, seeping, terrible wounds on the internet. I put some that are a little bad, but not as bad as you can find if you want to look and find something worse. Let's look at the second group within the arthropods. These include the insects. The insects are the single most diverse group of organisms on the planet. That is the most speciose. They have more species than any other. And they have some very distinctive features that you should know. Their ancestral condition is to have mandibles, jaws with teeth, but many no longer have that. That's what this panel down here shows. This shows grasshoppers, and they do have mandibles with teeth. You can't see the teeth because of this thing right here. This is like the lip, and it's covering the teeth, but there's a mandible and there's a mandible. Now, a butterfly is an insect, but it no longer has mandibles. It has a coiled tubular mouthpart used for drinking nectar. A fly has a sponge-like mouthpart. This shows a termite with it has these funky big jaws. This is a weevil, one type of beetle. Beetles typically have mandibular mouthparts, but in this case, they're really tiny on the tip of this long proboscis. This would be like a true bug, and it has a piercing, sucking mouthpart called a beak. And they can be used to pierce plants and suck plant juices, or to pierce animals and suck the juices from an animal's body. So that's about the mouth parts, but mandibles is the ancestral condition. Insects have 3 body parts, 2 antennae, and 6 walking legs. So you might add here that they have 3 body parts. I think we'll just use the illustration below of the grasshopper rather than me trying to draw them. The 3 body parts are the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. The head has the antenna and the eyes and the mouth parts. The thorax is where the legs and the wings are attached, and the abdomen is specialized for digestion and reproduction. Should note that most insects have 2 pairs of wings, so a total of 4 wings. The exception to this is flies. Flies have 2 wings, or 1 pair of wings total. So you should be able to draw an insect, a head, a thorax, and abdomen, 1 pair of antennae, 6 walking legs, and usually 4 pairs of wings. A grasshopper has 2 pairs of wings, or 4 wings total. A grasshopper has 4 wings. The first 2 wings are leathery and straight, and that's the ones that we see here. And folded underneath them are some membranous wings. And so that makes 4 pairs of wings total. Now, insects undergo a metamorphosis, and this is the correct spelling of metamorphosis. And a metamorphosis is a change, and there are different types of insect metamorphosis. And so let's look at the next slide, and this will actually show some of the types. There are actually 3 types. One is direct development, and in direct development they go directly from an egg to a small adult. Now, that's not so common, but there are some insects that do that. Incomplete metamorphosis here has 3 stages that you need to know, 3 name stages. The egg, and then the nymph, and then the adult are the 3 stages. Notice that there are multiple stages of nymphs, and that is because the insect has to grow, and each different stage of nymph, it actually sheds its exoskeleton until it sheds and gains its wings. Once an insect has its wings, it will no longer shed its exoskeleton. That's why you often see insects, in particular butterflies, that have beat up wings because they don't shed their exoskeletons and get new wings after they achieve their complete adult status with their wings. So that's incomplete metamorphosis. Now, in complete metamorphosis, there are 4 name stages. Of course, in direct development, there are 2 name stages. Here, it's the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult. The larva is often worm-like and looks nothing like the adult. That's unlike the nymph over in incomplete metamorphosis. Here, the larva looks completely different, and it's specialized for feeding. And it has different names in different groups. In a beetle, we call the larva a grub. In a butterfly, we call the larva a caterpillar. In a fly, we call the larva a maggot. So we have all these different names for larvae. What is true of those insects that have complete metamorphosis, though, is that they, after the larva feeds and gains enough energy, it will become a quiescent stage. Quiescent means it doesn't move around, called a pupa. And the pupa can be in a cocoon covered with silk threads, or it can be in a chrysalis covered with a protein cover. That's kind of what this one looks like. In any case, we used to erroneously think that it was, we called it anyway, a resting stage because it wasn't moving. But of course, it's a time of significant and great change when you go from looking like a worm-like thing to a butterfly or to a beetle or a fly, whatever you're going to become out of that pupa. Insect life cycles, of course, they have several advantages. One of them is that the larva, the immature, whether it be a larva or a nymph, can feed in a different niche. And as I noted earlier, in the case of dragonflies, for example, which have incomplete metamorphosis, their nymph is aquatic, while the adult is aerial, and this allows them not to compete as much. So we can't really do justice to the diversity of insects, but we can try to show you a few photos just to give you some idea. Here's some convergent ladybird beetles, or as everyone wants to call them, ladybugs, but they're actually beetles. We're not learning the orders of insects. Here's a flea in the lower left, here's an earwig, here's a fly, here's a luna moth, and here's a swallowtail butterfly. Here are some beetles in the upper left, lower left, and top middle. And in the center, this is a pie chart, which you don't need to memorize, but I just wanted you to see that Coleoptera is the order of beetles, and there are many more beetles than any other single group of insects. And there are more insects than any other kind, more insect species than any other kind of organism on the planet. And so it's really quite amazing. I've shown you this on the right. This is the moss on this sheet with a light shining on it by the reservoir called Pena Blanca. And then you can see some butterflies down there. It just gives you an idea of the tremendous diversity. Some people think that there are 10 million insect species alone. Some say, oh, that's not close. There's 30 million. Remember, we only have 1.8 million described species total right now, and many of them, of course, are insects. So, and insects serve, they can be very beneficial or they can be very harmful. Ecologically, they are necessary. If insects disappeared, ecosystems would collapse. If humans disappeared, well, the richness of the ecosystems would slowly return in our absence. And so it shows that insects are indispensable to the functioning of ecosystems. Humans certainly are not. Let's look at the third and final group here rather quickly. These are the crustaceans. These are aquatic arthropods. Their ancestral condition is to have mandibles. Now, in fact, they are quite diverse, more so. I'm only really looking at one order of crustaceans here, so it might be a little misleading. I want you to understand that there are other crustaceans like water fleas and copepods and fairy shrimp and other things, brine shrimp, that don't fit the characteristics that I'm giving you here. These characteristics are only for one group, and these are the Decapoda, the large crustaceans, which includes crayfish and crabs and lobsters. So these have two jaws called mandibles. They have 4 antennae. They have 10 walking legs. The pinchers or the chelipeds are a modified walking leg for handling food and for defense. This is missing a comma here. It should say that they're mostly aquatic. There are land crabs and whatnot, but they go back to water at times. And this includes the crabs, lobsters, and shrimp, at least the group that we're looking at. But this doesn't come close to touching the diversity of crustaceans. But just because of time, we're not going to pursue the other groups. So here you can see the decapod crustaceans. And with that, we're going to complete this module.